November 20th, 2001. A father pulls into his estranged wife's driveway to pick up his 2 young children for Thanksgiving weekend. He walks through the open garage, just like he's done dozens of times before. Oh, he knocks on the interior door, and in the next 30 seconds, 2 shotgun blasts echo through that garage, ending his life. Minutes later, a frantic 911 call. "I've been shot. My husband and I, we've been shot." The caller claims 2 masked intruders burst into her home and opened fire. But when investigators arrive at the scene, nothing adds up. No forced entry, nothing stolen. The husband's wallet still in his pocket. And the wife? Her gunshot wound tells a very different story than the one coming out of her mouth. This is the case of Brenda Andrew, a devoted Sunday school teacher, a mother of 2, and now the only woman sitting on Oklahoma's death row. Today, I'm taking you through a case that shows how secret desires and forbidden relationships can transform ordinary people into cold-blooded killers. And trust me, the truth behind what happened in that garage is far more disturbing than you think. Before we get into how everything fell apart, you need to understand who Brenda Andrew was, or at least who everyone thought she was. Brenda was born on December 16, 1963, in Enid, Oklahoma. She grew up in a middle-class Christian household, the kind of family where church wasn't just a Sunday obligation, it was the center of everything. As a kid, Brenda was quiet, studious, and deeply committed to her faith. She served on the student council, earned straight A's throughout school, and spent most of her free time involved in church activities. When her father passed away, family members later said Brenda became the glue that held the family together. She took on responsibilities, stepped up when things got hard, and seemed to carry that sense of duty into every area of her life. In 1984, at just 21 years old, Brenda left her out-of-state Lutheran college and came back home to Oklahoma to marry her high school sweetheart, Robert Andrew. Everyone called him Rob. They'd known each other since they were teenagers, and from the outside it looked like they were starting a beautiful life together. Rob was charming, charismatic, and successful. He worked in advertising at a firm called Jordan & Associates, and people who knew him said he had this magnetic personality that drew others in. But Brenda was no slouch either. She excelled in her career, and even earned an Employee of the Year award. But when Rob's job required them to move, first to Texas, and then back to Oklahoma, Brenda adjusted her own ambitions to support his career. That's just what she did. The couple had 2 children, a daughter named Tricity and a son named Parker. After they were born, Brenda left the workforce to become a full-time mom and a Sunday school teacher at North Point Baptist Church in Oklahoma City. And let me tell you, she didn't just show up on Sundays. Brenda was known in her community for her dedication. She cooked meals for elderly neighbors. She'd walk alongside a neighbor with Alzheimer's to keep them company. She led Bible studies. She was the person people turned to when they needed help. For 17 years, the Andrews family looked like they had it all figured out. 2 kids. A nice home in northwest Oklahoma City, active in their church, the kind of family you'd see in a commercial for the American dream. But here's the thing about perfect lives. They're often hiding the deepest cracks. And those cracks were about to become a chasm that would swallow this entire family whole. Before we continue, I want to ask you something. Have you ever known someone whose perfect life turned out to be a complete facade? Someone who seemed to have it all together on the outside, but behind closed doors, it was a completely different story. Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if you're ready to see just how dark this case gets, hit that subscribe button, because you're not going to want to miss what happens next. As Brenda approached her 40th birthday, something shifted. Maybe it was a midlife crisis. Maybe it was years of suppressed dissatisfaction finally bubbling to the surface. Whatever it was, Brenda Andrew, the woman who taught children about morality and Christian values every Sunday, started living a double life. It began with a man named Rick Nunley. Court records would later reveal that Brenda carried on a sexual relationship with him from late October 1997 until March 1998. But Rick wasn't the only one. There were multiple affairs, multiple men, spanning several years. Each time, Brenda would return home, kiss her husband, tuck her kids into bed, and wake up the next morning to teach Sunday school like nothing had happened. But then came James Pavat. And this wasn't just another affair. This was different. And James wasn't some stranger Brenda met at a bar or through work. He was a fellow Sunday school teacher at North Point Baptist Church, the same church where Brenda and Rob worshipped, the same church where their children learned about faith and family values. James was married too, with a family of his own. And just like Brenda, he was willing to risk it all. Now, here's where things get really twisted. James Pavat wasn't just Brenda's lover. He was also a life insurance agent. And around the time their affair began heating up, James helped Rob Andrew set up a life insurance policy through Prudential. The value? $800,000. Let that sink in for a moment. The man sleeping with your wife is the same man who just made sure you're worth $800,000 dead. As the affair intensified, Brenda's marriage to Rob completely collapsed. By late September 2001, Rob moved out of the family home. He was devastated, but he hadn't given up hope. Shortly after he left, Brenda filed for divorce and started limiting his access to Tricity and Parker, the two kids he loved more than anything. Rob wasn't perfect, but he was trying. In his personal journal, he documented his faith journey, his struggles, and his transformation from someone who used to bring the party to life to a man deeply committed to his relationship with God. He wrote about his hopes for the future, about rebuilding his life, about being there for his children. On November 20th, 2001, Rob made his final journal entry. He wrote about his dreams for a happy future filled with his children, his family, his friends, and a home full of worship, laughter, and love. He had no idea he had less than 12 hours to live. While Rob was pouring his heart into his journal and praying for reconciliation, Brenda and James were making very different plans. Plans that would turn those two children into orphans and a Thanksgiving weekend into a nightmare. This is where things take a truly dark turn, and I need you to pay close attention to what happens next. The choices people make when they think they can get away with anything. They're chilling. If you're finding this case as disturbing as I did when I first learned about it, give this video a like. It genuinely helps me continue bringing you these important stories that we all need to hear. November 20th, 2001. The day before Thanksgiving. It should have been a day filled with anticipation and family warmth. For Rob Andrew, it was supposed to be the start of a holiday weekend with his kids. Rob had made plans to take Tricity and Parker to his parents' house in Enid for Thanksgiving. Despite everything that had happened, the separation, the divorce proceedings, the limited access to his children, he was determined to be there for them. He was their father, and nothing was going to change that. Around evening time, Rob pulled up to Brenda's house in northwest Oklahoma City, the house he used to live in, the home where he'd raised his children. Now, he was just a visitor, coming to pick them up for the weekend. He parked in the driveway and walked toward the garage. The garage door was open, just like it usually was. This was his routine. He'd walk through the garage and knock on the interior door that led into the house. He'd done it countless times before. There was no reason to think this time would be any different. Rob stepped into the garage. He moved toward that interior door, and then the first shotgun blast tore through the air. The 16-gauge shotgun pellets struck him in the torso, the impact dropping him where he stood. Before he could even process what was happening, a second blast hit him near his neck. Rob Andrew collapsed onto the cold garage floor, bleeding out just feet away from where his children sat inside watching television. Inside the house, 10-year-old Tricity and 7-year-old Parker had the TV volume turned up. They didn't hear the shots. They didn't hear their father dying in the garage. They just kept watching their show, completely unaware that their lives had just changed forever. Minutes later, a 911 call came in. It was Brenda's voice, frantic and breathless. "I've been shot. My husband and we've been shot." When police and paramedics arrived at the scene, they found Rob lying on his back in the garage, motionless. 2 shotgun wounds. Already gone. And Brenda? She was standing there with a gunshot wound to her arm, bleeding but conscious. Between gasps, Brenda told the responding officers her story. She said 2 masked intruders dressed in black had burst into the garage while she and Rob were there. One carried a shotgun, the other had a pistol. They opened fire without warning, shooting Rob twice and hitting her once before fleeing the scene. A random, violent home invasion. Wrong place, wrong time. That's what she claimed. The paramedics treated Brenda's wound and rushed her to a local hospital. The injury was described as superficial, painful, but not life-threatening. Meanwhile, Rob's body was photographed, documented, and eventually taken to the medical examiner's office. And those two kids? They were brought out of the house, confused and terrified, about to learn that their father was dead and their mother was hurt. In one night, their entire world had been shattered. But here's what Brenda didn't count on. Investigators don't just take your word for it. They look at the evidence. And the evidence was already starting to tell a very different story than the one Brenda Andrew was selling. From the moment investigators stepped into that garage, alarm bells started going off. Brenda's story about a random home invasion sounded plausible enough on the surface, but the evidence? The evidence was screaming something completely different. First problem, nothing was missing. In a home invasion robbery, thieves take things, that's the whole point. But Rob's wallet was still in his pocket, untouched. Brenda's purse was inside the house with cash and credit cards still in it. The TV, electronics, jewelry, all still there. So if this wasn't a robbery, what was it? And why would two masked intruders shoot a man twice, wound his wife, and then just leave? Second problem, the forensics didn't match Brenda's account. When investigators examined her clothing, they found a ring of gunpowder residue around the gunshot wound on her arm. You know what that means? It means the gun that shot her was fired from extremely close range, somewhere between 2 and 4 inches away from her skin. But according to Brenda's story, the intruders were across the garage when they opened fire. The gunpowder evidence made that physically impossible. Someone had pressed a gun right up against her arm and pulled the trigger. This wasn't a random shooting. This was staged. And here's another detail that didn't sit right. Rob had been shot twice with a 16-gauge shotgun. But Brenda's wound? That came from a pistol. 2 different weapons. Why would home invaders switch guns mid-attack? It didn't make sense. The detectives started building a theory, and it was dark. What if Brenda wasn't a victim at all? What if she was the perpetrator? What if someone else was involved, and they shot Brenda in the arm on purpose to make it look like she'd been attacked, too? But they needed more than just forensic inconsistencies. They needed someone who could speak to Brenda's state of mind, her behavior, her reaction to Rob's death. Enter Pastor Wade Burleson. Rob's parents had asked Pastor Burleson to officiate their son's funeral, and on the Friday after Thanksgiving, Burleson went to Brenda's home to discuss the arrangements. Now, this wasn't Burleson's first time dealing with grieving families. Before becoming a pastor, he'd served as a chaplain with the Tulsa Police Department. He'd sat with families of murder victims before. He knew what grief looked like. But when he sat down with Brenda Andrew, something felt off. Burleson asked her a simple, standard question, one he'd asked dozens of grieving spouses before. Would you tell me what it is that you will miss about your loved one? Brenda just stared at him. Silent. No tears, no emotion, nothing. Burleson tried again, rephrasing the question. Can you share a quality about Rob, or maybe a memory that stands out to you? Brenda's response? One word. Nothing. Not, I can't talk about it right now. Not, this is too painful. Just nothing. She had nothing she would miss about the father of her children, the man she'd been married to for 17 years, the man who'd just been murdered in her garage. Burleson left that meeting deeply unsettled. The moment he got to his car, he called Oklahoma City Police Headquarters and left a message for the lead detective. You might want to put a tail on Brenda. If she's not the shooter, she's at least complicit in her husband's murder. The police took his advice. They assigned officers to watch Brenda's movements. Rob's funeral was scheduled for Monday, November 26th, at Crossings Community Church. The funeral director called Pastor Burleson that morning and told him Brenda had phoned 30 minutes before the service, saying she and the kids were on their way. But Burleson had a gut feeling. He told the funeral director, "Start the service anyway. Brenda's not coming. She's on the run." He was right. Brenda Andrew never showed up to her husband's funeral. While family and friends gathered to mourn Rob, while his parents said goodbye to their son, Brenda was fleeing. She grabbed James Pavat, threw her 2 traumatized children in the car, and headed straight for Mexico. The officers who were supposed to be tailing her. She slipped right past them on the day of the funeral. For 3 months, Brenda and James lived as fugitives south of the border, hiding out with Tricity and Parker in tow. But you can't run forever. On February 28, 2002, U.S. authorities arrested both Brenda Andrew and James Pavat at the Mexico border. They were both charged with first-degree murder in the death of Rob Andrew. And the case that would captivate Oklahoma, and eventually the entire nation, was just getting started. Can you imagine being Rob's parents in this moment? Not only have they lost their son to murder, but their grandchildren, 2 innocent kids, were dragged to another country by the very woman who orchestrated his death. What would you do if you were in their position? I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. And please share this video with someone who needs to hear this story. Cases like this carry lessons we can't afford to ignore. When Brenda Andrews' trial finally began in 2004, the prosecution came armed with a clear theory. Brenda and James Pavat had conspired to murder Rob Andrew for one reason: money. $800,000 in life insurance money, to be exact. The state argued that Brenda and James had planned this murder together. They'd calculated the payout, staged the home invasion, and even shot Brenda in the arm to sell the story. It was cold, it was calculated, and it was all about cashing in on Rob's death so they could run off together without the messy complications of a divorce. James Pavat eventually confessed to pulling the trigger. Initially, he tried to claim Brenda wasn't involved, that he'd acted alone out of some misguided sense of love. But the prosecution wasn't buying it. They presented evidence showing this was a joint effort from start to finish. According to the state's timeline, here's what actually happened in that garage. James Pavat fired the first shotgun blast at Rob, and then Brenda grabbed the shotgun and fired the second shot, making her an active participant in the murder. After Rob was down, James took out a .22 caliber pistol, pressed it against Brenda's arm, and fired, creating her victim wound. But here's where this trial took a turn that would spark controversy for decades to come. The prosecution didn't just focus on the murder itself. They went after Brenda's character with a level of aggression that stunned even seasoned courtroom observers. They brought in testimony about her sexual history going back nearly 20 years. Witnesses testified about affairs she'd had in the late 1990s. They talked about the outfits she wore to dinner, the clothes she wore grocery shopping, the underwear she packed for vacations, how often she had sex in her car. The prosecutor literally held up Brenda's thong underwear in front of the jury, while urging them to convict her of capital murder. Testimony included details about her dyeing her hair red to please one of her lovers, about her behavior toward men at social gatherings, about every affair, every indiscretion, every moment that could paint her as a woman with loose morals and no regard for her marriage vows. The message was clear. Brenda Andrew wasn't just a murderer. She was a bad wife, a bad mother, and a bad woman. And the jury heard it all. Even years later, the state of Oklahoma would admit that most of this evidence was irrelevant to the actual murder charge. Judge Arlene Johnson of the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals wrote in a dissenting opinion that the evidence had no purpose other than to hammer home that Brenda Andrew is a bad wife, a bad mother, and a bad woman. But in that courtroom in 2004, it worked. On July 15, 2004, the jury found Brenda Andrew guilty of first-degree malice murder and conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. 2 months later, on September 22, 2004, she was sentenced to death. James Pavat was tried separately. He too was convicted and sentenced to death. Brenda Andrew became the only woman on Oklahoma's death row, a distinction she still holds today, more than 20 years later. Since her conviction, Brenda Andrew has spent over 2 decades behind bars at Maple Bassett Correctional Center in McLeod, Oklahoma. For 16 years of that time, she was held in solitary confinement. Think about that for a moment. 16 years, with virtually no human contact beyond brief exchanges with guards and 1 hour each week with her priest. No matter what she did, no matter how guilty she may be, that kind of isolation breaks people. Throughout all of this, Brenda has maintained her innocence. Her legal team has filed appeal after appeal, arguing that the excessive focus on her sexual history made her trial fundamentally unfair. And here's the thing, they might have a point. In January 2025, the United States Supreme Court granted Brenda relief, ordering a federal appeals court to re-examine whether all that testimony about her underwear, her affairs, and her personal life was so prejudicial that it violated her right to due process. As of now, her case is still being reconsidered. The appeals court could uphold her conviction, uphold her death sentence, overturn both, or order the state to retry her. But regardless of what happens legally, the damage has already been done to the people who mattered most. Rob and Brenda's 2 children, Tricity and Parker, lost everything that night in November 2001. Their father was murdered, their mother was arrested, and eventually sent to death row. At ages 10 and 7, they became orphans in every practical sense. Rob's parents, E.R. and Lou Andrew, stepped in to raise their grandchildren in Enid, Oklahoma. These were people in the later stages of their lives who had to summon every ounce of strength they had left to give those kids a stable, loving home. By all accounts, they did an incredible job, but it shouldn't have had to happen. So, what can we learn from this tragedy? Because that's what we're here for. Not just to recount horrible events, but to understand how they happen and how we can prevent them in our own lives. Affairs don't start as murder plots. They start as emotional connections. A little attention from someone who isn't your spouse. A conversation that feels more exciting than the ones you have at home. A touch that sends a thrill through you because it's forbidden. It feels harmless at first. Just talking. Just enjoying someone's company. Just feeling alive again. But here's what Brenda Andrews' case shows us. Once you cross that line, once you start living a double life, the lies compound. The secrecy becomes addictive. You start justifying more and more extreme behavior because you've already justified the initial betrayal. And when your spouse becomes an obstacle to the life you think you deserve, when they're standing between you and your happiness, between you and that insurance money, between you and your new lover, some people convince themselves that elimination is the only option. That's the escalation pattern we see here. Brenda didn't wake up one day and decide to murder her husband. It was a series of choices, each one darker than the last. The first affair, then the second. Then the affair with James, then the life insurance policy, then the conspiracy, then the murder, then fleeing with her children to Mexico. Each step seemed logical in the moment. Each step felt justified. But the end result? A dead man. 2 traumatized children, a woman on death row, and a lover who confessed to pulling the trigger. If you're in a relationship that's falling apart, if you're tempted by someone outside your marriage, if you're feeling trapped and looking for an escape, there are legitimate ways to handle it. Divorce, as painful as it is, doesn't leave anyone dead. Therapy might save what you think is broken. Honest conversations, as uncomfortable as they are, don't result in life sentences. But secrets, lies, affairs conducted while teaching Sunday school, those create a foundation of deception that can lead you places you never imagined going. This case should serve as a wake-up call for all of us. If you, or someone you know, is in a relationship heading down a dangerous path, if you see the warning signs of deception, escalation, or rationalized betrayal, please seek help before it's too late. Talk to a counselor, talk to a trusted friend, and do whatever it takes to step back from the edge. And if this story resonated with you, if you believe these lessons need to be heard, subscribe to this channel. Every week, I bring you real cases that carry messages we all need to hear. Don't just watch, be part of this community. Rob Andrews' life ended in a garage on a cold November evening, just hours after writing in his journal about hope, faith, and a future filled with love. He never got to see that future. He never got to watch his children grow up. He never got to experience the redemption and peace he'd been working toward. Instead, he became another statistic, another victim of a crime that didn't have to happen, another life cut short because someone else decided their desires were more important than his right to exist. When I look at this case, I don't just see a sensational true crime story. I see a preventable tragedy. I see the consequences of choices that seemed small at first, but snowballed into something catastrophic. I see 2 children who will spend the rest of their lives processing the trauma of losing both parents in one terrible act. Your choices don't just affect you. They ripple outward, touching everyone in your orbit. Your spouse, your children, your parents, your community. And in cases like this, those ripples become tidal waves that destroy entire families for generations. The next time temptation whispers that you deserve more, that the rules don't apply to you, that you can get away with just a little deception, remember this story. Remember Rob, who wanted nothing more than to be a good father and rebuild his life. Remember Tricity and Parker, who lost their childhood in a single night. Remember that every choice has a consequence, and some consequences can never be undone. Rob Andrew deserved better. His children deserved better. And if nothing else, let this case remind us all that the pursuit of selfish desires at the expense of others never ends well. Not for anyone. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and remember, the choices you make today shape the world you'll live in tomorrow.